It is April 21st, 2025, and we have a number of updates to go over today as you have Russia officially enacting its new special partnership treaty with Iran at a time when both countries are looking at possible deals with the US. Both countries are engaging in talks with the US, and they're probably likely weighing just how much they can trust the Trump administration. So we're going to be getting into all of the latest that is happening here today. And of course, as you can already see, I have Jax back with me. He is back and better than ever. He endured surgery, made it through, spent a few days in the cone of shame, and got cleared by the vet. And she said that he is healing very well. So he's here to say hi. And he's also here to celebrate the fact that we are almost to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Y'all, we are so close. Thank you so much to every single one of you. I have some fun plans for when we get to that milestone. So I'm looking forward to it. I'll be announcing those soon. But as always, very grateful for y'all and for all of your support. And Jax is happy to be able to come back and to say hi again. All right, I'm going to go lay him down for his afternoon nap, and then I'll be back with the news. And we're back. And just a quick note before we get into today's topics, because I know that Pope Francis just passed away at the age of 88. He has had weeks of health struggles. I know he's been in and out of the hospital, and it was notable to see that in his final address, he still brought up the Palestinians. That has been a theme for the last year and a half now, as you have Israel carrying out this genocidal bombardment against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And you've had Pope Francis the entire way through raising awareness about it, calling for a ceasefire, and continuing his outreach to the Palestinian people. And I think that that is something that needs to be noted and that needs to be recognized, maybe more so by someone like Vice President J.D. Vance, President Trump, and those individuals in this administration here in the US who want to pay attention to the Pope, but not so much to some of the messages that he has to bring. That being said, I'm not Catholic. I am whatever the official term is for when you were raised in evangelical Christianity and you saw enough abuse, corruption, and judgment within the church to not want to be affiliated with it anymore, but yet you still believe in God and you're just kind of navigating your way. That's where I'm at the moment. I know that I have a lot of different people that follow me from all kinds of different religious beliefs, and I always want to be respectful of that. And I know that there are a lot of people around the world who are mourning today. I'm very curious to see who the next pope is based on kind of the tone that it sets for our world as a whole. It does have an impact on the world. It does have an impact on religion around the world. And so curious to see how that comes together. It's not exactly a topic I really cover, but I did want to make a note of that because it is a major news story that is happening today. And it's also happening as you have the Pope in his final address speaking up about the Palestinians, while at the same time you have Israel killing over 100 Palestinians in just 72 hours, including dozens of children in Gaza. And speaking of conflict, I know that there was at least an attempt at an Easter ceasefire over the weekend. You had Russian President Putin announcing plans for a ceasefire for about 30 hours. And then you very quickly had Russia's defense ministry coming out and saying that it logged nearly 5,000 violations from Kiev's end along the front lines. And you also had Kiev accuse Russia of a number of violations, which isn't really surprising when you take into account the fact that Zelensky's reaction to Putin's announcement was to basically say that he wasn't going to take it seriously, right? That he did not think that Putin was serious about this. And you have this back and forth now, but it's yet another reminder that Kiev and Moscow are not to the point where they are ready for a full-on ceasefire and for an end to this war. And I think that that is especially on Kiev's side. I mean, for every quote-unquote ceasefire agreement or version of it that we've seen in terms of a limited ceasefire on the targeting of energy infrastructure, they haven't followed through. And then this latest one, they didn't follow through. Now, Granted, you also look at the fact that the US has been directly involved, at least with the initial agreement, and Kiev wasn't involved with that. So I'm not exactly surprised that they're not taking it seriously, but you can tell that Trump is starting to get frustrated because he seems to want to wrap this whole thing up real fast, right? He wants a deal, he wants a full ceasefire, he wants an end to the war in Ukraine. At least he's saying that he wants that in name only, but he's not taking any actual steps to get Kiev to stop the fighting on its side, right? It would be different if he told Kiev, hey, we're done with the support for you. You need to do XYZ. You need to stop fighting. You need to adhere to this ceasefire agreement or that agreement. But he's not doing any of that. Instead, he's speaking out on social media. And in a post on Truth Social on Sunday, in all caps notably, Trump said, hopefully, Russia and Ukraine will make a deal this week. Both will then start to do business with the United States of America, which is thriving, and make a fortune. Which is interesting to me that Trump phrased it that way because it's yet another reminder here that he is still treating this as if the US is just some sort of third party to this conflict, as if it is a deal that needs to be made between Russia and Ukraine, when in reality, we know that it's a deal between Russia and the United States, between Russia and NATO as a whole. That is what is going to lead to an end to the current war. That's what's going to lead to an actual ceasefire at the end of the day, because it's only the US that can get Kiev to stop fighting on its end. And there's not going to be some separate deal specifically between Russia and Ukraine that does not involve the US. And I talked about this in a video that I published on Friday. And I also thought it was notable that I got a few comments from people saying that I had read it wrong in terms of Rubio's comments and then later Trump's comments, where they were threatening to walk away, right? They were saying, hey, if we don't get a deal soon, if negotiations don't progress, we're just going to walk away from this altogether. And there are some people who think it's much more of a warning to Ukraine than it is a warning to Russia. And I can see that logic. I think where I was coming from on that was the fact that you had Rubio in particular. He previously said earlier this month that, oh, we're going to find out soon if Russia is serious about a ceasefire, right? He was putting the pressure on Russia to agree to a deal on their end, not necessarily putting the pressure on Kiev because the US thinks it can just force Kiev into whatever it wants from them. So that's more so where I was coming from in looking at Rubio's latest comments. Yes, I do think that there is a certain amount of pressure that the Trump administration is putting on Zelensky, but they also are putting pressure on Russia, because I think that the Trump administration is realizing here that the game that's being played right now is the game where Trump goes to Zelensky and he says, hey, I need you to agree to a 30-day ceasefire. And Zelensky says, oh, okay, whatever. You know, we don't know what words are said behind closed doors. We don't know what threats are doled out, at least from Trump's end. So then Zelensky says, yeah, sure, he'll agree to a 30-day ceasefire, and then the US goes to Russia. And what does Russian President Putin say? He says, yeah, I would love to have a 30-day ceasefire. Now, here's the 87 different things we need to talk about, and we need to get on the same page about it. We need to agree to before we can get to that 30-day ceasefire. And so the position that that puts the Trump administration in is when they're kind of realizing, okay, Russia didn't say no, but they did kind of say no in the sense that they're listing all of these different demands, bringing up all of these legitimate things. I don't think that Russia is just, making stuff up out of thin air. I mean, when you're talking about, okay, we want a 30-day ceasefire. Okay, well, how is that going to be enforced? And the very legitimate question as well of what is going to happen to Kiev's government and military during a ceasefire? Is NATO going to have free reign to rearm them and do whatever it wants to do, which is what it previously did under the Minsk Accords? Is Russia going to be stuck with another frozen conflict, just waiting to see when is it going to unfreeze and when are we going to have another war? Because those are all things that Russia has said that they do not want. So when Russia says, yeah, sure, we'd love to have a 30-day ceasefire, but it needs to be part of this overall agreement to end the war and to have a lasting peace, well, then the Trump administration is kind of stuck. And so you can see them getting frustrated, right? You can see Rubio and Trump especially getting frustrated with the fact that they are not seeing any and in their eyes, meaningful progress towards an end to the war in Ukraine. But they are seeing progress towards normalization with Russia in terms of the fact that you have this dialogue ongoing. But I also think that as much as the Trump administration is starting to get frustrated and they may not feel like Russia is taking this seriously, well, you don't really have indications that the US is taking this seriously either, because every time we get another report citing anonymous sources of the proposal that the Trump administration is going to give to Russia and Ukraine aimed at ending this war, you look at the proposal and it's filled with things that Russia will not accept. Take this latest version from the Wall Street Journal, for example, as it says that the Trump administration presented Kiev with a plan that, while it would include the recognition of Crimea as part of Russia and an end to Ukraine's aspirations to join NATO, well, it would also include the US taking control of the Zaporozhye Nuclear Power Plant. And again, there's no language on the question of what would happen to Kiev's government and military during a possible ceasefire, during an end to the war, whether there would be a commitment to neutrality there, or whether NATO would continue to use Ukraine as a proxy state. And I think the fact that you have any language involved, and now, yes, these are anonymous sources. This is not Donald Trump himself coming out and saying these words. We should note that. But the fact that you have any talk at all of the US taking over the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, that did technically come from US officials at least last month, because that was when Trump held a phone call with Zelensky in which officials from his administration came out and said that he raised the idea of the US taking control of Ukraine's nuclear power plants moving forward as a way to deter conflict with Russia. So if that's the case, if that's the language that was included in this proposal that was given to Kiev, then the US is not getting out of Ukraine. The US is not walking away from Ukraine. No, the US would be looking at getting increasingly more involved in Ukraine, both with this minerals deal that they keep talking about and with this claim that they want to take over the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. But here's the thing. Who's had control of that power plant since 2022? Because it's not Kiev, it's Russia. And it's hard to see Russia agreeing to give up control, especially if the US is the one. And they can say, oh, we're going to make it a neutral zone, blah, blah, blah. But the US is essentially saying, we want to take control of this power plant. I do not see Russia agreeing to that. And so we're stuck back in this forever limbo, right? The US, the Trump administration, they act like they're frustrated with Russia because they say, oh, well, we're not getting enough. Russia's not taking this seriously. They are frustrated with Ukraine, I'm sure, as well, because Kiev is really not taking this seriously. But the Trump administration on its end is not giving Russia anything tangible that Russia should be taking seriously. I mean, saying that they're going to recognize Crimea, it's like, okay, Crimea has already been reincorporated as a part of the Russian Federation for over a decade now. That's not exactly anything big or marvel coming from the US or even coming from Kiev, I would argue. We've moved on. There are 4 new regions that Russia is saying that it's incorporating into the Russian Federation after referendums that were held back in 2022. That's, of course, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. So this conversation, the Trump administration, if they do try to present this promise of, oh, we're going to recognize Crimea or we're going to drop Ukraine's NATO ambitions, it's like that is the bare minimum of what they could try to offer Moscow. And I just do not see Russia agreeing to a deal when that is what the US is offering up, as if that is what Russia should be accepting, especially at a time when, again, Russia is actively winning this war. Meanwhile, Kiev is facing active weapons and manpower shortages, and Russia is not. Okay, so you have Trump in this position where the US is engaged in talks with Russia, and they're also engaged in talks with Iran. And the Iran talks are rather interesting. We've seen 2 weekends in a row of talks, and apparently they've gone well because now we have reports that we're going to see there are plans for a third weekend of talks coming up. And right now, the reports are that there is talk surrounding the framework for a possible nuclear deal. But of course, we have to remember that this is not the first nuclear deal involving Iran. Oh no, we previously had the JCPOA, which was signed in 2015, involving Iran, the US, and a number of other countries. Oh, and then the Trump administration just came along in 2018, unilaterally pulled the US out of that deal and basically decided that they were done with it. And now the Trump administration wants to come back for their second term and basically complain about the fact that Iran is in this state where the JCPOA has essentially been ripped to shreds, mainly by the US, and to complain that there is not a deal. But the other interesting factor is that in 2025, Russia could end up playing a very key role in a possible future nuclear deal involving the US and Iran. Because as reports have noted, the two most daunting issues are the storage or destruction of Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium and the external guarantees that can be provided to Iran if the US was to breach an agreement to lift economic sanctions in return for Iran putting its civil nuclear program back under external supervision by the UN Inspectorate, the IAEA. They say that Russia could play a key role in a deal on the future of Iran's nuclear program, with Moscow being touted not only as a possible destination for Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium, but also as a possible arbiter of deal breaches. So you have the US in this position where they're basically trying to figure out, okay, how do we convince Iran to get back into a nuclear deal with us? But at the same time, they have to convince Iran that one, they're not going to pull out of it, and two, if they do pull out of it, that well, all of these sanctions need to be lifted in the first place, but that those sanctions aren't going to be reimposed. And that could be a tricky part here, right? Because Iran has already gone through this. They already had a nuclear deal that involved the US, then the US pulled out of it, and then the Trump administration reimposed all of these sanctions on Iran and kept up with the sanctions on Iran. So I don't think that we're going to see a deal come together overnight, but it is also interesting that Iran now gets to be in this position where not only do they get to say, hey, we need these guarantees from you, the US, but they also get to bring in Russia, because now is a time when we are seeing Russia and Iran enact officially a new partnership treaty of their own. As reports noted that Russian President Putin ratified parliamentary approval of a new comprehensive strategic partnership agreement on Monday, which he originally signed with his Iranian counterpart Masoud Pezeshkian back in January. The treaty formalizes a commitment to building stronger relations across multiple areas, from national security to peaceful nuclear energy to joint resistance against unilateral sanctions. So in other words, you have Russia and Iran closer than ever, working together in a number of fields and basically saying, hey, you cannot separate us. And all eyes are on the US, because for years now, the US has played this game where they've decided to target whatever country they want to of the moment. And they target that country by calling for the rest of the world to isolate that country, by throwing sanctions at that country, by trying to overthrow the government there, to completely isolate the economy, to make the people miserable, to harm the average citizens in order to put pressure on the government of the moment that they don't like. And clearly that didn't work in Russia. Clearly Russia is still standing, but now you have Russia in this position where it's working with other countries like Iran, another country that has been targeted by the US in a so-called maximum pressure campaign in recent years. And now the US is finding out the hard way that when it tried to isolate Iran and it tried to isolate Russia, that made those two countries just want to work together even more. It made them set the standard for countries around the world. And China also factors into this, and I think is going to be a major factor in this, because its partnerships are also stronger than ever. You also have China in this position of saying, hey, we want to work with countries that want to work with us. We're not going to work with countries that are agreeing to these arbitrary deals that the US is throwing out there to try to suffocate China. And what that does is it puts the Trump administration in this position. And I hope that they fully realize this, that if they want to wage war against Iran, if they want to bomb Iran, that's going to harm their talks with Russia. If they decide that they want to target China in an all-out war, they're not going to get Russia and Iran on their side. They're not going to separate Russia from China and, get Russia to go up against China in any sorts of tensions. That is not going to work out. If anything, what the US has done with decades now of US foreign policy, it has continued to isolate itself, and it has encouraged countries around the world to work together even more. For far too long now, the US establishment has chosen war over peace. And we're seeing the results of that in this growing multipolar world. We are seeing other countries rising up against US hegemony, wanting to work together. And I think that that is more evident than ever in this new partnership treaty between Russia and Iran, making it official. Not just that they want to work together, but that they are going to continue to stand up to the US. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And that's something everyone should be talking about. If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also find Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.